Good evening and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Modern conflicts are often a blend of conventional warfare and hybrid tactics. Now, on one hand, we see traditional military engagements, while on the other, there are acts of hybrid warfare. Now, according to Bruno Kahl, head of Germany's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russian sabotage against Western targets could eventually push NATO to consider invoking the Mutual Defense Clause of Article 5. Now, joining me now to discuss how NATO might respond to these evolving threats and whether collective defense can effectively counter Russia's actions is Jacek Raubo, Director of Analysis Department at Defense 24. Good evening, Jacek. Thank you so much for being with us here on TVP World Talks this evening.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Jacek, so Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, this forms, it's the cornerstone, right, of NATO's collective defense. It's crucial to the way that NATO operates. Now, German Intel Chief Bruno Kahl suggested that Russia will likely want to test, quote unquote, how this principle operates in practice. Can you tell us what might that actually look like in the real world terms? What scenarios could arise? What actions could Russia take to challenge or provoke NATO's response?
Truly, it's not a surprise for us. When we think about the Russian stress tests against the stabilization inside our region, but also in this much wider perspective of NATO structure. So when we are talking about Article 5 right now, we need to deal with various scenarios against our security and defense measures. As you mentioned, we are, of course, focusing right now generally on the typical kinetic and military actions against our targets, against our infrastructure, people. On the other hand, there is a large space for the gray zone. So all of the actions below the threshold of war. So here, Russia is using, first thing, their intelligence services. I'm not talking about the classical form of espionage. This is something which is well known and well described in our books and also in the debates about Russian activities against the West. I'm talking mostly about some secret operations against our critical infrastructure, against our industry, against also, for instance, some situation in the media domain or info domain. So there is, of course, some hybrid types of actions when you have a combination of Russian armed forces or Russian intel, and also some different actors like the hacker groups. So unfortunately, from our side, we are dealing with the mix of typical and unusual forms of pressure against our security, and we need to be ready for all of them. And that's why right now, when we are thinking about the NATO structure, we have so many discussions how to build, of course, the classical formula for defense and deterrence measures. On the other hand, how to strengthen our capabilities to action, to have this opportunity to action against the Russian activities coming from this gray zone. But we can stay here for, I think, a long time and describe various scenarios against our security architecture.
So then let me ask you this. What should we be more afraid of, Russia's hybrid war or the fact that NATO countries will not respond decisively enough to potential future Russian attacks?
I suppose this will coming from the political scene from the NATO member states is very important, even the crucial aspect of NATO architecture. On the other hand, we need to have tools to respond. So there will need to be a balance between the willingness from the political side of NATO members and things we have in our hands. I'm talking about the military, I'm talking about the counterintelligence activities. I'm talking also about, for instance, actions inside the info domain. So I don't want to make a division between both cores of NATO action right now and NATO activities right now.
With the prospect of change in U.S. leadership under Donald Trump stepping in and taking over in January, how could shifting dynamics in Washington now affect NATO's collective defense strategy in the region, particularly in relation to Poland and Ukraine?
From my perspective, I think we are much more optimistic toward this 20th of January transition from the Biden administration to Trump administration, because we have a long-term presence of American interest here in Poland, in Romania, also in Baltic states. So I'm sure that from this alliance, we will see a constant security guarantees. But on the other hand, we need to be sure that Kremlin will try to make some stress tests against the will of whole NATO to secure their interest in our region. That's why it might be this January, it might be a very dangerous time for security of our region. But on the other hand, as I mentioned before, I'm so sure that we will see a large number of activities coming from US to strengthen our posture against any form of aggression, as we talked before, any form of hybrid or this non-kinetic forms of actions, potential actions against our security. So we need to be much more patient and much more balanced in our emotions when we are describing this future transition in White House and also a new Congress in the United States, because as we see and as we can see, for instance, naval support facility openings and also APS, Army Proposition Stock activities here on Polish soil, we need to be sure that this is the long-term U.S. presence with a lot of other aspects, practical aspects we haven't seen before 2022.
But don't you think that if when Trump takes over, will the U.S. want to maintain its role as NATO leader? Wouldn't this be a sign of actually provoking Putin?
I think we are having some procedures and also some lessons learned coming from the NATO history to solve any forms of problems dedicated to this disturbing situation between the European NATO members and also United States and maybe Canada. So I'm very optimistic about the structure of NATO. I'm not so optimistic when we think about the perspective on NATO coming from the Russian side. They might have this misunderstanding of our strength, and that's why we might see some possibilities of actions against our critical infrastructure or even against the Baltic states during this transition time. But on the other hand, I think you are focusing on this in your question. We need to still work on our European side of NATO. Mm-hmm. I'm talking right now about, for instance, our capabilities coming from the military side, but also resilience coming from non-military form of security, which is strengthening, of course, this European defense and deterrence posture against any forms of aggression coming from Russia. So this is not the end of our work. We are focusing, and we need to focus more on process, on system approach to our European pillar of NATO. And of course, Trump administration is emphasizing this aspect, and we will see more pressure on us to for instance, build more units, to prepare more munition stock, to build more effective on our own air defense systems, of course, with U.S. presence here. So I would like to right now balance this political emotion which is coming from both sides, because this is not only something which is observed in the United States. This is also a very important aspect of any political debates in Europe, with, of course, this military and strategic practice. So we need to be much more patient, and as I mentioned before, we need to work much more harder than before, because this is not the problem coming from US, this is the problem coming from Russia.
Now, let me ask you this. Now, Germany has offered to redeploy Poland air defense systems to Poland at the start of next year. Now, are these plans a good signal of European unity, or do you, on the contrary, see this as a signal of growing threat? I mean, with everything that you've just mentioned.
Always, we need to see defense and deterrence aspect of NATO actions. So every action dedicated to deterrence is something which is strengthening this opportunity to avoid defense actions. So dislocation of air defense systems from Germany, from Bundeswehr, is a very important and also very positive signal. Why? First thing, a political dimension. We need to present that Poland and Germany, we are working alongside to strengthen not only security in Poland or inside the Polish aspect. This is a vital signal for our allies inside Baltic states, also in Romania, in other places on the eastern flank. So this is the political dimension of this story. On the other hand, I think it's a very important aspect coming from dislocation of any air defense systems and missile defense system to Poland, because it is interoperability formula for future actions. We need to train. We need to also test our actions in very difficult and very problematic area. And air defense is a great lessons learned, not only for Germany, for Poland, but also for whole NATO. How we are working, how we are serving close to each other, and how we are building our response for any real threats coming from east, because this is also not the story dedicated to 1 year period of time. This is the story which will happen for maybe a decade. That's why I'm very optimistic, and I see it as an important, even crucial signal, not only for Poland, for Germany, but also for whole NATO perspective, that we are building this interoperability in very difficult time.
Thank you so much, Jacek Raubo, Director of Analysis Department at Defense 24, for breaking it down for us this evening on World Talks.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
And that was all for this edition of World Talks here on TVP World, where every word matters. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.